Hello friends and good Tuesday to you. A lot can happen in a week. Okay, so Monday night, Andrew started us off by looking at the moment when Jesus comes into Jerusalem and he's turning over the temple tables in the temple courts. So good. Okay, so let's jump right back into it, shall we? This is Mark chapter 11, and we're going to read verses 12 to 21. Remember, Jesus has just come into the Jerusalem. This is the very next day. The very next day, they are leaving Bethany, and Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went out to find if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat from your fruit again." And his disciples heard him say it. Okay, so at this point, this is where Andrew talked about Jesus goes into the temple, turns all the tables over, says, "My house is to be a house of prayer, not a den of robbers." All right, next morning, this is verse 20. As they went along, they saw the fig tree had withered from the roots. And Peter remembered it and says, "Look, Lord, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." Okay, so this raises all kinds of awkward questions. I mean, like, one, is Jesus a bad farmer? I mean, if he's the creator of the world, doesn't he know when plants are ready to have fruit? And two, does Jesus have a bad mouth? I mean, does he have anger issues? Because it sure seems like he's letting out all his anger by cursing out an innocent fig tree while in front of his students. And in the end, we find out that the plant actually does die and wither from the roots. So is this some kind of like divine abuse of power? I mean, how is this healing and helpful and pointing us to God? I know. So, as you probably know, with Jesus, there's always so much more going on than what's on the surface. Because with Jesus, the way and the truth and the life, the more you dig, the more you seek and ask questions and turn on lights, the more layers of truth you're going to find. If you're willing to go there. So, shall we go there? Okay, first, a little bit about context, form, and symbol. Context, form, and symbols. First of all, context. When and where does this event happen? Form. Is the gospel writer giving us any clues in the way he has laid out this account? And finally, symbols. Are there layers of meaning here that might be easy for you or me to miss because we're not really in on all the symbols of that culture in that day and time and what they would mean? Kind of like when we say LOL, that's kind of a cultural reference, right? Okay, so first, context. Jesus, of course, is on his way to Jerusalem, where he knows he is going to be rejected and killed by the religious leaders, the Roman guard, and even many people who were just very close to him. This is going to be a culmination of his entire life and ministry of teaching and healing and helping people to see who he really is. Fully God, fully human, God with us, right? Okay, so that's context. Form. This is cool. This passage we've just read and the scene that Matthew explored last night, Jesus tossing the temple tables, are presented to us in sort of a sandwich form. Let me show you. So it's like you read fig tree, temple, fig tree. Fig tree, temple, fig tree. So does the fig tree have something to do with the temple or the religious system? Now symbol. The temple, of course, was about as powerful a symbol of Jews that they could imagine. Another powerful symbol for Israel that was just as powerful, the fig tree. So by cursing the fig tree, or you might say exposing, judging, or rejecting the fig tree in this moment, Jesus is rejecting the corrupted temple system and the strongholds of the religious leaders. In this moment, Jesus is essentially burning the flag. But why? What is he saying with such a dramatic action like this? Okay, so check this out. This is, I'm going to read something to you about, this is from the author N.T. Wright, a biblical scholar. He explains a little bit about this in his commentary. I love this. He says, part of Jesus' charge against his fellow Jews was that Israel as a whole had used its vocation not to be a light of the world, but as an excuse for a hard, narrow, nationalistic piety and politics in which the rest of the world was not to be enlightened, but condemned. It's like the temple had been intended to symbolize God's dwelling with Israel for the sake of the world. But the way Jesus' contemporaries had organized things, it had come to symbolize not God's welcome of the nations, but God's exclusion of them. This is what Jesus is rejecting. It's all the ways the religious system had grown all the wrong ways and turned in on itself until it was no longer producing any good fruit for anyone, in or out of season. The tree had become corrupted. It was rotten, and so it withered from the very roots. And the time had now come, Jesus is saying, for us to uproot this thing, and so that something nourishing can grow in its place in this good soil. I should say it's important for us to remember that making this kind of a dramatic, symbolic, powerful gesture, it doesn't come cheap. Jesus engaged in it only as a culmination of a life given to healing and teaching and feeding and simply loving people into God's new life. And it's this action that comes right before his own violent death. So cursing the fig tree, you might say, is sort of one of Jesus' most dramatic enacted parables. What I mean by that is it's like where he physically demonstrates what is true in God's eyes. But the most dramatic would come just a few days later, when he himself would take on the curse into his own body and wither on a tree. I know, right? So much more going on here, and so much more to come. Be sure to tune in the same time tomorrow as Pastor Ken picks up the story, because as we know, a lot can happen in a week. But for tonight, are there fig trees in your life? Maybe they've produced some good fruit at one time, but it's time now to pull them out, to allow something new and needed to grow in its place. Grace and peace, my friends.